At the end of chapter 1, Max is being reassigned from his post on Mount Evans to Squaw Mountain, which is at an elevation of 12,000 feet. So now Edna and Rolf can join him. So we pick up with chapter 2 called Three on the Lookout. It was dark when we reached Idaho Springs, but we had to get up to Squaw Mountain since Max was to start his fire lookout duty at 7 a.m. the next morning. The rocky dirt road seemed endless, but we finally came to a dead end and a turnaround. You'd better stay here with Rolf until I get the stove going, Max advised. Then I'll come back and guide you. The stars were brilliant in a black sky, which was all I could see from the side of the mountain. It seemed as if Max was gone forever. I began wondering what was keeping him when I looked up and saw red sparks in the sky. Realizing this was from the stove, I almost panicked. We're going way up there in the dark? Soon I could see a small light bobbing along as Max returned with a lantern. As I stepped out of the car, the wind tore at my coat and almost bowled me over. I picked up Rolf, who was sound asleep, in his bundle of blankets. We started up a narrow trail which zigzagged through huge rocks. Finally, we came up against a stone wall, which turned out to be the base of the lookout. Max led the way around one side and then up a steep stairway and onto a balcony. With the wind pushing at us, it was all we could do to open the door and get into the lookout. It was one room, about 18 feet square, with huge plate glass windows all around. I'd never seen such a sight. I was thrilled. It seemed all of Denver was glittering right below us to the east. I looked to the north, and there, 4,000 feet straight down, was the main street of Idaho Springs. It was both exhilarating and frightening. Max made 2 more trips down to the car to bring up Rolf's bed and the groceries. In the light of the Coleman lantern, I made up the double bed built right into the wall under the south windows. A counter ran around 2 sides with cupboards below, and part of the counter was a desk. This would have to double as our dining area. There was a small wood cooking stove in one corner. In the middle of the room was the fire finder. I realized then why there were no upper cupboards and no walls anywhere, only glass, so nothing could block out the 4-directional view from the fire finder. Later, I was to find out just how hot it could get in there when the sun was setting. The wooden shutters, which jutted straight out, helped during the middle of the day. What I did to create a little shade was undoubtedly verboten. I hung a small blanket on a string tied to the stovepipe damper and across to the door. It gave us some shade and made a darn good place to hang laundry. The next morning, I learned more about our mountain area. From the fire finder, on each side were bent metal legs curving into the floor. Near the finder was a 3-legged stool with a glass insulator on each leg. Max explained to me that during the summer, when lightning is striking all around, the forester will sit or stand on this stool so that the balls of fire rolling off the metal legs of the firefinder will not electrocute him. I was glad to hear that the mountain electrical storm season was over. Off toward Kansas and the prairies of eastern Colorado, beyond Denver, however, I could see lightning still striking. What a strange setting, I thought, and we have a ringside seat. Well, little fellow, I said, picking up Rolf and tossing him in the air, You're going to fly the highest diapers in the U.S. The only phone was a direct line to the Forest Service in Idaho Springs. What was happening in the outside world was unknown to us. We heard no news of the war. The 6 weeks up on Squaw Mountain went fast. We had plenty to read, and the ranger from Idaho Springs came up twice, bringing us groceries. No visitors, which I didn't mind. Max enjoyed getting reacquainted again with our son. We took turns taking the one hike possible out to the benchmark, an elevation station on the mountain. This covered a blind area that we couldn't see from the tower. We had to check every day from where we could look down and out for any smoke. I especially remember a lovely ptarmigan on the trail. He would wait every day for one of us to appear, and then he would start out just in front of me to sure that I couldn't touch him. He walked ahead with great dignity, cocking his head and looking back now and then to make sure that I was following. His feathers had already started to turn white for his perfect winter camouflage in the snows to come. Having been impressed all summer with the wildflowers, I now enjoyed the vivid reds, oranges, and ambers of the low shrubs all around us, and the many shades of colors of the lichens on the big gray rocks. Aspens turned to gold on the slopes below us. Every day, it seemed, the mornings were crystal clear, but once in a while in the morning, Denver and the plains to the east would completely disappear in fog. We would look over an ocean of clouds rolling up the gulches of the foothills like huge surf waves. Half an hour later, the fog would completely disperse and the sky would be a deep blue with a cloud anywhere. The balcony completely encircled the building. I would put Ralph there in his bed for his morning nap. Once I was tucking him in, a big eagle swooped down under the shutters, almost touching my shoulder with his wing. He was magnificent, but frightening. Let me show you a picture of this lookout. See if you can see that. That was the tower up on the mountain that they lived in for the 6 weeks. One morning there was a haze, and Max announced, "There's a forest fire off to the northwest. I'd better call it in." Telephoning down to Idaho Springs Ranger Station, he was surprised when they told him he must be mistaken. No fire had been reported anywhere. Well, Max insisted that it had to be a big one, and he believed it to be over on the Route National Forest, not far from Steamboat Springs. If it were, he was told, it would have been reported to the main Denver office. All day Max watched the haze, and at sunset time he was very upset. "There is a forest fire over there, I'm positive," he told me. The next morning the phone woke us early. It was the ranger station. "If Denver calls you, don't mention the report you made to us yesterday," they said. "It seems there's a big forest fire just northwest of Steamboat Springs, and the regional office would be pretty upset if they hear you called it yesterday." "Well, glad you finally believe me," Max retorted, and that fire took them almost 2 weeks to put out. We watched the landscape turn into many autumn colors like a big Persian carpet spread out below us. One morning we woke up to spitting and hissing sound. Sleet was driving hard against our windows, and frost feathers were building up on the wooden shutters. The phone rang. It was the Forest Service office telling us a storm was on the way, as if we couldn't tell. and requesting us to vacate the lookout immediately. Hoarfrost was beginning to crystallize and whiten the balcony. It was a good thing mist and clouds prevented us from seeing the view. That made it easier to pull down and fasten the already frosted shutters. Hurriedly, we bundled all of our belongings, wrapped Rolf well, and started through the storm, down over the slippery rock path to the car below. We must have looked like fleeing peasants. I couldn't help laughing to myself at the picture we must have made. I looked back once, and hating to leave where we had had the most beautiful 6 weeks, I saw that the snow and clouds were already obscuring the lookout as we descended in a swirl of snowflakes. After checking in at the Forest Service in Idaho Springs, we drove on to Dillon and to the Jouches, who had invited us to stay with them when we came down. It was good to see them again and to see Bess more. The next morning, Max and Jake Jouch took their skis and drove up to Loveland Pass for the first skiing of the season. When I collected our mail in Dillon, among the letters was a small but very welcome check. Just a month before Rolf was born, before we left Penn State, I had written an article entitled "Forestry Goes Skiing" and had sent it off to a forestry magazine. The reason I had written it was because I'd gotten into an argument with one of the forestry professors who had informed me that skiing had no place in forestry. Well, the magazine sent me 2 copies, and I delightedly noticed that the professor was on the board of trustees of that magazine. An offer for logging in the Northwest materialized, so we bought a small trailer and loaded it with what we thought we'd need. Max took me to Denver, where Rolf and I boarded the Union Pacific train headed for Portland, Oregon. Then he drove west with a little Ford convertible, hauling the trailer. The train was crowded and full of soldiers. My departure from Colorado could not have ended with more finality than that day on the train, leaving Denver in a glowing sunset. Looking out of the window to the west as the sun was setting, I didn't want to take my eyes off the mountains until I could no longer see them. But the porter came through and pulled all the shades down tightly. "Couldn't I just keep my shade up a little while longer?" I asked. "Sorry, lady, but all the trains got to be blacked out," he stated. "Don't you know we got a war on?" The next 3 years were another sort of blackout time as we'd left our hearts back in the mountains of Colorado. One bright spot was the birth of our daughter, Sunny, born 8 months later in Longview, Washington. It was a town on the Columbia River, built below the waterline and protected by dikes. Many years later, I overheard Sunny say to someone who had just told her she was a bit different, "Oh, that's because I was conceived above timberline and born below sea level." Next time, we'll be looking at Chapter 3, The Return to Summit County.